Feeding our babies is supposed to come naturally. We see images of cooing babies and smiling moms and doting grandmas and expect that to be us. We don't see all the struggle that goes into every decision that seems so high stakes at the time. We don't expect all the leaking, the engorgement, the deciding to take a break. We don't expect all the judgment, whether we breastfeed or bottle feed or pump or don't. Or maybe we do expect all those things and it comes smooth sailing. But what I have encountered as a doula, a childbirth educator, and a lactation professional is that when I tell people what I do, the stories flow out naturally. And I love hearing them. I hope you do too. I'm your host, Lo. Welcome to the Milk Making Minutes. I started the Milk Making Minutes because I'm passionate about supporting breastfeeding people. But more importantly, I knew that hearing real people tell real stories would benefit both the storytellers and the listeners. I had this idea for 3 years before I launched. I asked so many people how I should begin, and Anchor came up repeatedly as the easiest way to launch a podcast. And I have not been disappointed. If you are passionate about a topic and have wanted to start a podcast, you can use Anchor to record and distribute your podcast. It's easy to use. You can use the editing tools right from the platform. You can distribute your podcast episodes seamlessly to listening platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts right from Anchor. And the best part is, it's free. And the tech support has been great too. Go to anchor.fm or download the app right to your phone to get started on your great podcast idea.
Hi, Sara. Welcome to the Milk Making Minutes. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad you're here. So I know about your experiences feeding your children, so your babies. So I don't even know anything about your family. So I would love you to start out by just introducing yourself, however much or little you would like to say, and introduce your family, whatever relevant information you think would be necessary for us to know to kind of get the picture of what it was like when you were starting out feeding.
Sure. So I became a mom in my late 30s and have only been pregnant once. Our son, Elliot, was born premature by an urgent C-section at 35 weeks and 3 days. So he was born a peanut. And he just struggled with many of the issues that premature babies encounter. He wasn't quite ready to interact with the real world. He was expecting my placenta to kind of take care of all of his needs. But so he really struggled. We really struggled. And so he was in the hospital for 11 days and we in the special care nursery because he had some other health issues that didn't impact his feeding, thankfully. But thankfully, that was kind of a blessing in disguise because it gave us an opportunity to have access to lactation support that I otherwise wouldn't have had as readily had we been home. And so yeah.
Great. So I want to back up a little bit. I want to hear about that support in the hospital and what that was like. But before we do, I'd love to know, so you said you had a baby when you were in your late 30s. How old is Elliot now?
He's 14 now.
Okay. So this was 14 years ago. We're now in early 22. So you were in your late 30s. What exposure to breastfeeding and baby feeding in general had you had when you were starting your own family?
So I actually trained as a family physician and was interested in breastfeeding as a student because when I was working in the hospital, it seemed that a lot of people struggled, and the women that I saw that had the most success were those that had kind of a supportive village or extended network. And for myself, I moved cross country and was by myself. I didn't have that network of supportive and experienced women around me. So I wanted to I just had decided that that's something I wanted to be a part of. And I was very
Mm,
fortunate that my husband, even though he had zero exposure, zero experience, just wanted to support my decision. And
mhm,
so he was just very helpful
mhm,
and supportive when things weren't going easily. And
mm.
um, so yeah, that's kind of where, even though
Yeah.
I didn't have that much exposure, it's just something that I had wanted. I was determined to make it our experience as long as it worked for our kid.
Yes, exactly. And so, did you, in your training, as a family physician, did you help other families with breastfeeding at all, or were you referring them to other professionals? What was your experience there?
So both, both.
Okay.
There was, I had some knowledge, and then after I
Mhm.
had my own kid, had more experience, direct experience.
Mhm. Mhm.
But I was fortunate to connect with other physicians who were both experienced and either were lactation consultants themselves, in addition
Mhm.
to being physicians.
Mhm.
Um, and so I knew I had my limits in terms of identifying issues early on and being able to troubleshoot, and was fortunate to work alongside some lactation consultants and specialists. So that was very helpful.
Mhm.
But it was only after having my own kid that I really came to appreciate just the constancy of
Mm.
motherhood. the
Right. Right. I
there
think that's how it is for all of us. Yeah. Yeah. No matter
yeah,
experience before, being parents or having children in your home. I
right,
think you can't
all the
really
time.
know until you're there, right? Yeah. Yeah. So, you mentioned that you had made a cross country move before having Elliot. So, did you had you talked to your own family about breastfeeding?
Um, a
Um,
a bit, but
mhm,
I think there were some cultural and generational issues there. So, my mom was widowed early, and so, did she have the support she needed?
mhm,
No. Um,
mhm,
and so, I have one sister, she breastfed one of her kids, but not the other. Not really invested, I guess, in breastfeeding as something that she would, just really spend a lot of time or effort
mhm,
doing. So yeah, we're just very different people. So yeah, so I really didn't have that connection or modeling close close to me.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah. So then by the time you were pregnant, um,
Hmm.
and you had had exposure in your professional and you knew that that's what you wanted as long as it worked out for you, did you set any goals or do any additional research now that it was your turn? What resources did you use to try to set your
Well, I had
mindset
actually,
about feeding your babies? Yeah.
yeah. Well, I guess I had actually, in medical school, we had a requirement to do an independent project, and I chose to focus on breastfeeding. So I actually had worked on developing an educational tool to use with medical students. And
Mm,
so I was approaching it more from the clinical side. And
mhm,
um, and so for me, I didn't have any set goal in terms of duration or expectations. My pregnancy was just riddled with complications and unexpected news. And so I just kind of
mhm,
learned to roll with whatever came our way. And so
mhm,
it was something, like I said, that was important to me, but recognizing that it wasn't the only consideration that I had in terms
right,
of
right, yeah,
balancing the well-being and health of the kid and myself. And
mhm,
so yeah, so I just kind of approached it in a more open and
Mm-hmm.
hopeful way,
Mm-hmm.
and was fine asking for help and saying, "Hey, I'm not sure what's going on," or "Hey, I just had an urgent C-section, so my body kind of is still shocked into thinking it's
Mm-hmm.
pregnant and is trying to figure
Right.
out what's going on, and my milk isn't coming in, and it's now day 5."
Oh
Um,
man.
so yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, awesome. So thanks for giving us a lot of that background information. I think it's always really fascinating to know what previous experience or exposure, what the impact of that was on a person's experience once they're in the situation then themselves.
Right.
Um, yeah, so then you have your baby in a kind of really stressful situation at 35 weeks and 2 days, you said?
3, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. And so you said it was an urgent C-section. Were you able to hold Elliot right away? Did he need to be what was that immediate um
S
postpartum?
Yeah, so I got to see him very briefly. So one of the complications of the pregnancy is that we knew he had a significant lung mass that was
Mhm.
replacing the left lower lobe of his lung. And
Mhm.
so they needed to do a very quick assessment involving an x-ray and things like that, and continuous oxygen monitoring to make
Mm,
sure that he wasn't developing any respiratory issues that would require him to get transferred to Children's Hospital.
mm, mhm,
So I did not get to hold him right away. But as soon as I was able to get out of the C section, I was taken to the special care nursery where he was um, being observed. And they helped me get him on to breast, right there and then. And so it was great to work with a team of nurses that seemed very comfortable and experienced dealing with 5-pound babies and
mhm,
trying to get them to breast. And they also had a team of lactation consultants available, and they became involved within hours when they saw
oh,
that
great.
oh yeah, and that he didn't know how to suck. he would he was
Mm,
just not very well coordinated, would open his mouth rather than kind of clamp down. And um so they got involved very early on.
and what kinds of supports did they provide you?
Oh, everything from helping with position, positioning, access to a high quality pump, uh, helping me get onto a schedule for pumping, in that
Mhm,
he was in the special care nursery, so I didn't have 24/7 access to him. So
mm,
just trying to mimic what it would be like as if I did have him with me all the time.
mm,
Um, and so, one of the clear memories that I have of those early days was having this 5-pound baby on my chest and having my hands on him and my husband's hands on him and the lactation consultant's hands on him with
mm,
lots of, rolled up blankets, just trying to get him in the right position um, to give him the support he needed. And
mhm,
we ended up needing to do some tube feeding, like finger feeding, with a
mhm,
syringe and a little tube taped to our finger to try to
mm,
help him coordinate the position of his mouth and sucking, since he would just kind of let things dribble out of his mouth. But thankfully, we were able to avoid his having an NG tube put in, because
mhm.
he was able to feed just enough to avoid that.
Oh,
So we
that's so
were,
great. Yeah.
yeah, so we were very grateful because they said, well, we could try this finger feeding for a while. We said, yep, we'll do it.
Mhm,
We were willing to try anything and everything that they suggested, whether it was timing, positioning, finger feeding, whatever. We would do it.
yeah. Yeah, of course. And so that the finger feeding and the milk that you were giving him at that time, was that breast milk or was that supplemental?
So
Or
supplemental
both?
because
Mhm.
it really, I mean, my milk I think came in around the 5th day.
Mhm.
And I would pump and it would just be drops,
Mhm.
if
Mhm.
anything. And
Mhm.
so we were, and despite pumping a million and a half times, I mean, at one point
Mhm.
it was every 90 minutes and having such, limited output, the team at the hospital was just very supportive and encouraging, just saying, sometimes it takes longer, given these
Mhm.
circumstances and, my not being with uh, the baby at the time and
Mhm.
the circumstances around the C-section. And so they just kind of, you know, normalized it for us. Like, yep,
Yes. Yes.
sometimes
Mhm.
sometimes this happens.
Mhm.
And so it was just great to be in that kind of environment.
Mhm.
And then when my milk did come in, then you know, it was only that we, since he was preemie and was having issues with weight gain, we did boost the calories of my breast milk. They were targeting, I think, 24 calories,
Mhm.
as opposed to the standard 20, just to kind of help him at the beginning. But that only lasted, I
Mhm.
think, about 2 weeks. And then we were able to get off of that.
Okay. Okay, great. And you mentioned that they provided a breast pump. Were you using a multi-user hospital pump at the time?
Yes.
Okay, okay. And that this was before the Affordable Care Act, where
Oh, yeah.
now
Long before.
now everybody who has insurance, which in our state most everybody has insurance, so almost everybody gets a. But 14 years ago, that was not the case.
Right.
um,
Right. In the
so
ancient
were you
times.
Yeah, right. So were you able to take that pump with you? Were you able to rent that? How did that work?
Um, we were very fortunate that the hospital let me board there.
Mhm.
Even though I was discharged and was fine, but since the kid
Mhm.
was still there, I boarded for the duration of his hospital stay. So
Okay.
so I had access to the hospital grade,
Mm.
pump, and it
Mhm.
just sat in the room where I was
Mhm.
and used it whenever I needed it. And then by the time I got home, I already had my own pump to use
Okay.
at home.
Okay.
Mm.
Get any insurance coverage for that pump at that time, or was that out of pocket? Do
Uh
you remember?
I think yeah, I don't think we paid out of pocket for it,
Okay.
if I
Okay.
recall.
Yeah.
Um, mhm,
Okay. Great. All right. So you said that by day 11, he was
mhm.
healthy enough to go home.
Yes, and
Okay.
yeah, the neonatologist, they were following his weights very closely. He was having some issues with like heart rate going down and oxygen level going down at times, which is seen in premature babies. But when the neonatologist, they did just the full assessment, and I remember just her telling us, go home and be a family. Just, be
Mm.
a family,
Mhm.
continue nursing the baby. You'll be seen. We were seen, I think, the next day or within 48 hours of discharge by his
Mhm.
pediatrician. Um, and we had a pediatrician as opposed to family doctor because that's who we had available um,
Mhm.
with our healthcare plan at the time. And he gained a ton of weight. I don't remember the exact amount, but the amount of weight he gained from discharge to his first appointment at the doctor's was incredible, and he
Oh,
just
wow.
took off. Yeah,
That's so amazing. Yeah. I was going to ask because you mentioned not having that village that you knew
right.
was so important. And to go from being at a hospital where you felt so supported by such supportive nurses and lactation consultants, seems like the staff at the hospital you were at was so supportive. And then to go home, sometimes, especially with a preemie baby, that can feel intimidating to feel like, oh no, now I have to do it alone. So, did you have those feelings, or was it more a feeling of relief? I'm so glad I'm here. and you
Oh,
felt by that time that you had it handled?
oh
Well,
no, no, no. When they
okay.
told us they gave us the green light to go home. I just remember looking at my husband's like, are they serious? They're gonna trust us with this
Yeah,
child? Do
yeah.
they know who we are? We're like two professionals. We were attentive as attentive could be in the hospital and everything. And they're like, you're doing great. And we thought,
Mhm.
seriously?
Mhm.
um,
Yeah.
so so yeah, it just seemed so strange and
Mm.
just being let out into the open world and coming home and we did have the added stress that while I was at the hospital delivering him, our house was burglarized. So
Oh,
that just
no.
kind of threw a little curveball on the
Of
whole thing.
course.
But
Mhm.
but it really also helped ground us even more. Like, this is what's really important, and stuff is just stuff. So
Mhm.
it just really did sharpen our focus on
Mhm.
us as a little family
Mm.
unit. And so yeah, so once the kid figured out how to latch, like, he just kept going. And
Great.
there was no more schedule. There was just completely ad lib. He wanted a nurse,
Mhm.
we nursed.
Mm.
He didn't want a nurse,
Great.
we didn't nurse. But he wanted a nurse
Mhm.
a lot. And yeah, so he
And
he did really well.
do you remember once you got home, so now this is, he's 11 days old, but he's a preemie. He's an adjusted age there.
Right.
Um, but you're at home with him, so now it's your first time with your baby. Did you feel like there was a readjustment period to learning positions in the new environment,
Oh yeah,
in with your furniture, and what was that
absolutely.
like? And
Oh yeah,
um,
absolutely. And they just really focused on making sure I was comfortable at the hospital, whether I'd be sitting in the glider or in a regular chair.
mhm,
Um, so I just made that the priority, being here at home, whether I nursed in bed or on the couch, just to make sure that I put myself in a good position. Because if I weren't,
mhm,
then there's no way I could put the kid in the right position. So at that point,
mhm.
he was bigger, and I say bigger because he got up to 5 pounds 10 ounces. Um,
Wow.
I know, big kid. Um, then we were able to do other holds, like football holds for a while, felt really comfortable, and then he kind of outgrew it, or it just became more comfortable to just put him in different positions. And when
Mhm,
I don't remember how old he was, but when it got to the point where I could just hold onto him with one arm as opposed to needing at times my husband's help to get him situated, it just
mhm,
felt so light and freeing
mm,
because the kid
mhm,
can now participate at a level. It's like, oh, this is what a regular newborn could do. They could kind of hold their
mhm,
head. We didn't have to
mhm,
hold his head and his neck and his body and you know reposition and restart the latch and remind him that he had to close his mouth and not just open it,
yeah,
and
and how
keep it
long
wide
do you
open.
think it was before, like, "Okay, we've both got this. I have this and he has this."
I mean, definitely a couple of weeks,
Okay.
and then probably maybe around a little over a month, having his first bit of a growth spurt. It was just kind of like, oh, okay, now you want to nurse all the time. Okay,
Mhm,
readjust. And so
mm,
again, it wasn't, thankfully, nothing was very sudden. It just kind of, oh, you were nursing every couple hours. Now it's every 90 minutes. So it wasn't like a huge sudden change. And then I would kind of realize, like, oh, wait, something has changed, kind of more
mhm,
retrospectively.
mhm. Yeah, and you had the, additional complication of having C-section
Yeah.
scars, and, you were having to take care of that. So were there positions that were better while you were still healing up, and then positions that were you felt more healed? I know it takes a long time, but,
Um, I
did
was
you notice?
really I was really, really lucky with healing from my C-section, probably
Mm,
because I'm guessing the fact that he wasn't that big kind of
mhm,
helped.
mhm,
And I hadn't had that much weight gain. So by the time I got home, I felt pretty okay, which was shocking. Um, Not at all what I was expecting. I
mm,
still kind of took it easy, but
mhm,
you know, I was ready to go for walks in the neighborhood. And I'm not athletic by any stretch of the imagination, but I just really enjoy walking. And
mm,
so,
mhm.
we were able to do that even though it was winter.
Yeah, amazing. And then you've talked a lot about focusing on making sure he was latching and helping him learn and getting the suck right. But you haven't really experienced any pain or if there was any if there were any complications that you were a result of learning to breastfeed.
Um, Thankfully not in that, I mean, when I was doing my project way back in the day in medical school and then doing what we call baby rounds at the hospital, going around with lactation
Mhm,
consultant and working with new mom baby pairs, they just focus so much on getting the right latch and not allowing a bad latch to continue, just kind of breaking it and stepping back to avoid
mhm,
problems. I really took that to heart. And so if I felt
mhm,
that he wasn't latched properly, I would just kind of, I mean, at the beginning there was no seal, so there was nothing, no seal to break. But as he
mhm,
got a little bit bigger, if I didn't feel quite right, I would just take him off and start again. So,
mhm,
we would have some interruptions at the beginning, but I
mhm,
think I think it worked out in our favor,
mhm,
because then neither of us fell into any bad habits or bad positions that would create other problems.
mhm. Yeah. And a lot of people worry about, is my baby getting enough? And you said in those so much weight, from the
Oh, yeah.
time you were home till when you went to the pediatrician. But besides knowing what the number on the scale was, what were the other ways that you knew that he was transferring milk? What were the signs that you were looking out for?
Um, he just seemed peaceful.
Mm,
He seemed satiated. He wasn't kind of looking around. He didn't really cry a lot,
mhm,
at all
mhm,
actually at the beginning.
mhm,
And he just seemed, see the actual milk in his mouth. He just kind of looked blissed out after nursing, slept well. And so
mhm.
plenty of diapers. My gosh, the amount of laundry newborns create is
Mm,
impressive.
it really
Um,
is. Yeah.
but so yeah, and so that was just reassuring. And since he started off so small, just at the beginning, just to see the growth was just mind boggling. And to see, little limbs just kind of really plump out. And, by 3 months, he was just so round, and just
Mm,
happy. It's just like, okay.
mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
And and you mentioned that you had a pediatrician. Was that pediatrician generally supportive of breastfeeding
Oh yeah,
and
she was
of
great.
your decisions? Okay.
Oh yeah, she was great.
Yeah.
She was really great.
And what did nighttime look like in your house with a baby?
Um, just would wake up whenever. I think right at the beginning we kind of tried to stick to a schedule like we had in the hospital, just because he was so little and we were still fortifying anything that was pumped. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so we wanted to make sure we kept him on track with intake, sufficient calories at that time. But then
Mm-hmm.
afterwards, we just did it. If he'd wake up, I would just nurse, and then I would pump after he nursed. So I would be awake for a while, and the kid would be conked out. But my
Mm-hmm.
husband thankfully would be able to help to, clean up pump supplies, or that's when we would do laundry because why not? We were
Mm-hmm.
already awake. Um, And
Wow.
so, you know, we brought up a little microwave into the bedroom so I could just wash and sterilize pump parts upstairs without needing to
Oh,
go downstairs.
wow. You know, I
We
have
just
not heard anyone say that before, but that is such a good tip.
Oh yeah, yeah, we just got like
Mhm.
a free second hand, hand me down little microwave,
Mhm. Mhm.
and just created a little station up here.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
that way I didn't have to go downstairs and we could just,
Yeah.
go back to sleep. But I pumped through the
Yeah.
night, I mean, for a long time. I don't remember how
Mhm.
long, but
Mhm.
after he would nurse, I would just pump to make sure to keep up my supply at that time. And then I
Mhm.
stopped and I didn't have any issue, but I kept nursing him through the night for a long time
Mhm. And
since
by a
he
long time, what does a long time mean to you? Because that means different things
uh
to different people.
years. Um
Okay.
yeah. Like
Okay.
he was probably older than 2 when he would still kind
And he
of
was
at
still waking
times
to
wake up.
nurse.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
he might
And
wake up once to nurse or something.
w- was he in your room or was he in his own
Yeah.
space? How did you? Okay.
Yeah, he was in our
Very
room.
good. Mhm. And so you mentioned pumping through the night. Was that milk that you were still giving him supplement, or was that milk that you were saving for the future, or both?
We did a combination of both since I knew I'd be going back to work. I took 4 months off of maternity leave, and so
Mhm.
probably started kind of banking my milk after for 6 or 8 weeks just to start collecting a supply.
Mm.
For a while, I would just make just enough milk for him. No extra,
Mhm.
just
Mhm.
enough. It just was
Mhm.
perfectly matched. And so sometimes I would just have more of a letdown. I was like, "Oh, okay, let's save that." And
Mhm.
my husband would want to feed him, or when my mom came to visit and stayed with us for, a few weeks from California, and she stayed with us. She wanted to help out too, so she would just feed him expressed breast milk in a bottle
Yeah.
when he was a little
Yeah.
older. Hmm.
Yeah. Great. So you mentioned that you took 4 months of maternity leave,
Hmm.
and then you're back to work. So is that how that worked out?
Uh, yes, I ended up reducing my hours. I was going to go back 3 days a week, and that quickly became 2 days a week
Mhm.
for a little while, just because it was too big of a jump for my
Mhm.
body in terms
Mhm.
of milk production.
Mm.
And so yeah, so we ended up doing that for a little while. And since he was born with a lung mass, we ended up we tried we knew he needed surgery as a baby, so we were
Mm.
trying to also minimize exposure to daycare as much as possible to reduce
Mm.
the risk of illness, since he had this lung mass.
Mhm. Yeah. So, did he have that surgery as a baby?
Yeah, yeah, he had
Okay.
it right
Mm.
before he was 8 months old.
Before he was 8 months old, and did that impact breastfeeding at all?
Oh yeah, big time, because we
Yeah.
were back in the hospital. I mean, he was in the hospital for close to a week because the surgery
Oh,
lasted
wow.
14 hours. Yeah, it was a
Oh my
14-hour surgery.
goodness.
And, he was intubated for that whole time and he became very orally averse. So getting him,
Mm.
he wouldn't take a bottle. He completely weaned himself off the bottle um,
Mm.
during that hospital stay. So he'd only nurse at breast. And
Mm.
he was in the intensive care unit after his surgery. And he wanted to nurse. Like he was swollen, had all these lines and wires connected to him, and
Oh.
the nurses at Children's were phenomenal because we worked our way through this spaghetti of wires and mess and got
Mm.
him to nurse, and they just looked at him and said, "Well, that's what he needed," and they were great.
Wow. Mhm.
Yeah, we're
Yeah.
very fortunate.
Yeah, so how fortunate, because if he had not, been breastfeeding, I guess there are other feed babies, but they're probably a little more um, traumatic than just getting to
Right.
snuggle with your mom and feed from the
Right.
breast.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
And
so it
so,
provided him comfort and
oh, definitely, because he
nutrition.
ended
Yeah.
up losing one of the lines that he needed for pain control. And so they
Mm,
retried to start it, and they just could not start it. And it was just so, like you said, it was so traumatic to try to restart it.
mhm,
And I said, can we try nursing him? And like I was nursing him while they were trying to position the line, and that didn't even work. So we just
mm.
ended up switching to nursing him. Like that
Oh,
was his
his pain
nutrition,
relief.
but also his comfort and pain control, because once they stopped messing with him, he actually did exceptionally well. I mean, they were very surprised as to how quickly he was um, healing and recovering from such a
Wow.
long and complicated. They had some complications during the surgery, but despite that,
Mm,
he bounced back quite quickly.
mhm, mhm.
So
Wow. Well, I'm sure that those experiences still stick with both of you. Um, all three of you, your whole family.
yeah,
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 what a thing to have to go through as a brand new um, and a brand new person to the world too.
yeah. Yeah,
Um,
so that made
yeah.
it more complicated because, like I said, he weaned himself off a bottle. So after he had a month recovery at home, when he went back to
Mm,
daycare, they were trying to figure out how to feed him because he was
mhm,
so defensive about putting anything in his mouth.
mm,
And they always had wanted to keep breast milk in a closed container. They
mm,
never had to try to feed a child from an open container, breast milk from an
mm,
open container, because they
mhm,
just had their rules and regulations to abide by to make sure
mm,
other kids didn't accidentally get someone else's breast milk. But the
mhm,
daycare really went above and beyond to like whether it was spoon feeding him or cup feeding him, just to make sure that he would get enough during the
mhm,
day.
mm, mm. Yeah, so he recovered at home for a month,
Mm-hmm.
and you were able to take off during that
Yeah.
time on medical
Yeah.
leave
Yep.
or something of the sort. Okay. And so then you went back to work again your 2 days, for the 2 days of birth. Is that
After
or
that, I did go back. That's when I went back to 3 days,
oh,
and
because you
and
weren't as
then
concerned about the immune
mhm. So,
the
yeah,
immune issue.
so
Yeah.
I was able to go back 3 days.
Hmm.
At that point, daycare had developed a good rhythm with him, so we were
Hmm.
able to transition to 3 days and did that.
Okay.
Mhm,
Okay, so at this point, he's about 9 months old. Had he
mhm.
started solids at any point?
Yeah, some,
Okay,
some.
okay. And what was that like? What was introducing solids like? When did it start? What did he like? How did you approach that?
Mm, he he just pushed whatever we offered pretty much out.
And
Um,
when did you start trying? Was it around the
mm
6-month mark, or you just waited
I
until
think
he?
it was probably, yeah, somewhere between 5 and 6, I wanna say, just because
Mm-hmm.
he was on the younger side of things and waiting for just developmentally, was he ready,
Yes.
and head control and
Mm-hmm.
all that good stuff. And so
Yeah.
he was around 5 to 6, and I think back then they were recommending introduction of solids at around 4 months, but we waited a
Yeah.
bit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he has never been a phenomenal eater, I guess,
Mhm.
other than
Mhm.
the breast milk. Um, and so he just was not, he did not want to try things. He was not enthusiastic. He just did not express interest. He never watched us eat with interest. He just
Mhm.
never would put things into his mouth, especially
Mm.
after the surgery. So it
Yeah.
was a bit of
Wow.
a struggle at times, but
Mhm.
somehow we've managed to grow a 14-year-old.
Exactly. Yeah. He's figured out what he's needed to keep growing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So So he was still primarily, as babies do throughout that first year and beyond, relying on breast milk for his
Oh yeah.
primary calorie source. And you're pumping at work
Yeah.
to provide milk. And so I guess, were you relying a little bit on your stash and a little bit on whatever you pumped during the day at work?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I would nurse him right before I'd leave. I'd nurse him as soon as I got home. And I pumped at work for 2 years.
Mm, wow. That's a lot of pumping.
That is a lot of pumping, but
Mm-hmm.
it helped normalize it. So it just
Mm-hmm.
so happened that there were other younger physicians who
Mm-hmm.
had babies during the time. And so it kind of helped pave the way for
Mm-hmm.
them to have, blocks in their schedule so they could pump. They didn't feel awkward asking for it. Or sometimes they didn't even have to ask for it. It would just be offered because, like, well,
Mm-hmm.
Sarah's been doing this for 2 years.
Mm.
So it just kind of became it just became the norm, created a small pumping area that was,
Aw.
since a lot of us shared offices, so we kind of created a small shared area for pumping, but there was a curtain, there was some privacy, there were pictures of babies, but we also had a computer so we could chart and do other things that we just needed to do during that time if we so chose. Um,
Yes.
so it was helpful in other ways.
Yeah, that's great. So I know now Massachusetts law requires, and many other states as well, that any employer with more than 5 employees require, provides a pumping space that is not a bathroom that has an outlet. But at the
Right.
time, do you know if there was a law protecting you?
I don't.
Or
I'm not sure if there were. Because even when I went to jury duty, I was pumping in a closet. They
right,
didn't.
that's a whole different story, jury
Yeah, that's
duty.
a whole.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
but it was, again, within the first 2 years of his life.
Mhm.
So my employer, like, they did what they could, and they were getting prepared to do a massive renovation project. And,
Mhm.
one of the things that was included in that was actually a devoted lactation room with a sink
Oh,
and a
great.
fridge.
Yeah.
So they were they were tight on space, but despite that, they did move forward
And
in
this
an
was during
attempt
the
to support.
time that you were using that as a resource, or after, or before?
Um, Well, the renovations came shortly after I stopped pumping
Okay.
at work.
Okay.
But,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. So what you did by carving out that priority paved the way. Had
Yeah. Yeah, it
had there
was
been other people in your office who had pumped before you that you knew of at the time that you were there?
mm,
Or are you the first that
I
you remember?
actually don't know. There must have been, just
Mm-hmm.
because people had kids. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but it wasn't really out in the open or just talked about.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but for me, supervising resident physicians. Like, sometimes I'd be pumping and they'd have a question. I'm like, well, go ahead. So for me, it
Mm-hmm.
was important just to normalize, like, this is just my body
Mm-hmm.
working. It's working in a
Mm-hmm.
different way right now, but my mind and brain is available to talk to you.
Right.
And so just kind of being able to accomplish those different tasks
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
just kind of bringing them together in a very natural way.
Yeah, 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 that's great. And so, were you able to carve out the space for pumping? How frequently were you able to pump, or was it just fitting it in, squeezing in time? How
Oh
did that work?
no. Like, when I would be scheduled to see patients, for instance, I would have some of those two of those appointment times would be blocked for pumping.
Okay, okay.
So
And the
I had time.
oh, okay. And so was that was twice a day at work that you pumped?
I would get there early, so I'd nurse the kid right before I left. Get
Mm-hmm.
there early, pump,
Mm-hmm.
start seeing patients, pump,
Mm-hmm.
lunch, pump,
Mm-hmm.
afternoon, pump. And
Mm-hmm.
depending on what the traffic pattern was, sometimes I'd pump one more time before getting into the car.
Okay.
and then nurse as soon as I got home.
Okay.
So pumping was a part-time job.
Yes, absolutely. I know all. And did you find that your supply was as good when you were pumping while at work as it was when you were at home or nursing, or did you feel like it was different?
When I first went back after my maternity leave, I did notice a hit right away. But it was just such a shock going from 4 months at home and nursing whenever I needed to or wanted to needing to fit into a schedule, that I think that that was the biggest hit. But then I immediately pulled back my work schedule, and
Mm-hmm.
when I did that, it seemed to be a much smoother
Mm-hmm.
transition. So I
Mm-hmm.
didn't notice, and like I said, I continued to pump through the night or feed through the night and pump at work till age
Mm-hmm.
2. So
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
that just kept things going.
Right, right. Yeah, we look at calories and feeding on a 24-hour clock. So
Right.
if we think about 24 hours, if we can make up for it in the night, which is really hard for the parents
Yeah.
who are feeding the baby. But,
Right.
if
Right.
we're concerned about supply and baby not getting enough, that's a way to think about it, is the 24-hour clock.
Oh, no, and absolutely, and kind of supporting that prolactin surge at night, just
Mm-hmm.
kind of
Mm-hmm.
boosting that, I think helped.
Yeah, and were there ways that you helped yourself? Like, what did you do to not be so tired? Were there ways that you increased your own sleep, or helped yourself to
Mm.
not feel tired, or did you just kind of push through it?
Yeah, I think just kept working. I had
Mm,
already done medical school and residency training long before there were
mm,
any hour restrictions on how long we could work.
mm,
And
mhm.
so it didn't seem outrageous.
Right.
Um,
You
and
had
I
something
just,
worse to compare it to.
it's like, yes, I
Mhm,
have stayed up for work, for 40 hours straight, like working 40
mhm,
hours straight.
mhm,
And so it wasn't that bad.
mhm.
But it kind of was cumulative over time, but it wasn't that painful as before. So if I needed to
Yeah.
rest during the day or during the kid's nap, I would do the same. Um, or, just take advantage of his nap times to get other stuff done. But
Yeah.
yeah, but if I felt like I needed to rest, I would. But I think my body was younger then and also had been exposed to a more brutal training
Mhm.
schedule. And
Yeah.
I also just knew I think what also really helped was knowing it was just temporary. I didn't know how
Mhm.
long it would last, but I just knew it was
Mhm.
temporary. I wasn't going to be doing this for
Right.
the next, for the rest of my life. So I
Mhm.
think that mindset really helped a lot.
Yeah, I have to tell myself that a lot with any stage I'm in with my kids.
Yeah.
I won't
Yeah.
be doing this when they're 15,
Right.
you know. Yeah, hopefully. That's what I always end with, hopefully.
Right. Right.
Of course it'll be something else by then, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so then you said you nursed well over 2 years or till around the 2-year mark, or was it beyond that? How long?
Oh, long beyond that.
Oh, okay, let's hear about it.
long long beyond that. So he nursed I was nursing a kindergartner.
Oh,
Um,
wow, so great.
yeah.
Mhm,
So it just kind of happened. So
mhm.
he nursed until he was about 5 years and 9 months.
Okay. And does
Hmm.
he have memories of nursing?
Vague memories,
Uh-huh.
just kind of vague. Yeah, just kind of vague
Not that
memories.
your 14-year-old son wants to talk to you about nursing. I'm not sure if he does or not.
No, no, but
Yeah.
he's just a very empathic kid
Aw.
and just
Mhm.
very in tune with how he feels and is very aware as to how others around him feel. And
Mhm.
so he really thrives on establishing a close emotional connection with
Mhm.
friends, family, loved ones, pets. He's never met a
Mm.
dog hasn't become like total BFFs with. He
Mm.
just really connects at this level that I don't I don't encounter very often, even in adults. And so the fact that he's now a 14-year-old boy and he does this is pretty impressive, and I'm just kind of in
Mm-hmm.
awe at times.
Yeah. Aw.
And so I think nursing just kind of enhanced that. Like, it was already
Yeah.
there, but it just
Yeah.
allowed him to really be in touch and recognize that
Mm-hmm.
there are some the connection between the mental and the
Mm-hmm.
emotional, the physical, just all of that together. I
Mm-hmm.
think it just kind of
Mm-hmm.
really brought it together for him in a way
Mm-hmm.
that, he
Mm-hmm.
couldn't have learned in other ways perhaps, or just really
Mm-hmm.
enhanced it for him.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the attunement that we learn to have towards our children when we nurse them, we can have it in other ways.
Yeah.
If somebody doesn't, if it doesn't work
r-
out for them to breastfeed, they
ab-
can get that attunement in other ways.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. But it helps us learn that attunement towards our babies uh, in a way that I would have had to work harder, I think, to learn,
Yeah.
because it just forced me to sit on a couch and um,
Right.
because I might not have I my personality might not have naturally attuned me to my kids in that way. Now, some other people with or without breastfeeding, maybe their personalities would have attuned them to their children in that way,
Right.
without breastfeeding. But I think it helps us to do that and to have someone be so attuned to you for 5 years and 9 months, and to provide that to you for so long. Of course, you would pick up how to then become so empathetic and attuned to other people and beings in the world. That's so great. I love that you make that connection.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
So then what was remember what weaning was like? Was it very gradual? Had certain sessions already dropped and there were certain sessions that he really clung on to? What was that like in your family?
Um it was just very natural and gradual. I never, if you had asked me how many times did he nurse in the past 24 hours, I'd be like, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right,
Whatever
right.
he needed, whenever he wanted. I mean, after that first couple of months, I was just like, I don't know, just
Mm-hmm.
enough, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so enough looked different as he got older. And so I think the nighttime one was the last one to go, but again, it was so gradual,
Mm-hmm.
and and I didn't the last time I nursed him, I didn't realize it was the last time because it was
Mm-hmm.
just another time, and then it
Mm-hmm.
kind of, oh, wait, did a couple of days just pass by? Like, what happened?
Mhm.
It
Mhm.
was retrospective, and
Yeah.
so, yeah, so it just happened.
Yeah.
We didn't have like this conversation about it or anything. It's just,
Mhm.
he just had started kindergarten. He had other things to do.
Yeah, right. Busy,
He was
busy.
just entering a different stage,
Mhm.
and it just made sense. And so it just kind of like, oh wow, we haven't
Yeah.
nursed. Oh wow, look at
Yeah.
that. I would still cuddle him at bedtime and in the morning or things like that, but it was just kind of like, oh, it
Mhm.
there's no more nursing involved.
Mhm. And do you know how much milk you had, and at the end was it like you could really tell he was getting big swallows of milk, or was it drops? Do you know? Do you have a sense?
Um, it was much more than drops.
Okay.
It was definitely much more than drops.
Mm.
Yeah, just because I could just definitely still
You could
have
still
that
feel. Okay.
fullness, and
Mhm.
definitely had let down, like, up until the
Wow.
very end. I still
Wow.
felt the
Mhm.
tingles that
Wow.
came with it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm
So,
nursing a 4-year-old right now, but I have no 4.5-year-old, and I have no sense of how much milk she has. I ask her, "Do you still get milk in your mouth that you swallow?" And she says yes, but
oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Because
Yeah, yeah.
sometimes we would have
But I don't feel it.
conversations. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
we'd have conversations. I'm like, are you getting it? He's like, yeah, just hold on a sec. you know, it,
Wow.
just like give it a second. And I did
Yeah.
have a letdown. It would take a while. That's why I would have 2 appointments blocked at work, because I just,
Mhm.
to get my letdown to happen, it would just kind of take a while, or I'd have a second one that was even bigger
Mhm.
than the first. And so I'm like, okay,
Right.
I just have to wait. And so
Yeah.
he knew that. And
Mhm.
he would just be like, hold on, just give your body a minute. It'll come. He
Oh,
was
that's so
reassuring
sweet.
me. I'm
Yeah.
like,
Uh-huh.
thanks.
Yeah.
But it was kind of funny.
That is really sweet. So did you we didn't really talk about what nursing in public was like for you. Some people have different levels of comfort with
Oh,
nursing in public.
oh, no problem. I would just sit down wherever, or even I would walk around Costco and just nurse while walking the aisles of Costco. I've had multiple
Uh-huh.
conversations with people nursing, and they didn't even realize I was nursing. They just thought he was asleep. And then he'd just pop
Yeah.
up and be like, hi. And they'd be like,
Uh-huh.
he was awake? I'm like, yeah, he was nursing. I was talking to you
Uh-huh.
for 15 minutes and he was just kind of nursing, dozing, but he was nursing. Um, yeah, so I nursed whenever and wherever without hesitation, and I was very fortunate. Like, I never encountered any negativity at all. I'd nurse in restaurants, supermarkets, wherever,
Mhm.
and sometimes, like, I'd be at Costco and it's like, oh, they have a couch display. I'm gonna sit on this couch and nurse my
Yes.
kid.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So
And
yeah, so people were yeah. So
did
people
that
were totally fine.
did that level of comfort change the older he got? Or did you always feel, even when he was 5 years, 9 months, that you could nurse him
Yeah,
whenever, wherever?
I honestly can say I never hesitated to nurse him wherever he was. So, like, if he had, say, like, as he got older, he would nurse more at home and not so much out,
Mhm.
like, because like I said, he was a bigger kid. He had other things to
Mhm.
do.
Mhm.
But say, like, he had a bad fall or something and he
Mhm.
just needed that comfort. And it's like,
Mhm.
yeah, would I just, like, plop down on the floor in the middle of the park and nurse him? Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
So it just, yeah, I just never
You just
hesitated.
didn't think twice. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't
Yeah.
think twice, and I don't know if that kind of prevented people that maybe would be like, "What is she doing?" Because it's
Mhm.
just like, "I'm gonna do this."
Right.
And
Right.
so I was just very, I guess, matter of fact about it.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
and like I said, the number of times people were shocked that I'd be nursing him and having a conversation with them, and they had no idea. Um, so
Yeah. Yeah, that's wonderful. Um, so as we're wrapping up, I have two more curiosities for you. I don't know if your questions might vary, or your answers to this might vary because of your professional training
uh-huh.
or not, but I always like to ask, number one, what was the worst advice about breastfeeding that you were ever given, if you can think of any?
The worst advice.
Mm-hmm.
Um, hmm.
It sounds like you had a pretty supportive experience, so maybe you
I
didn't get
did, and
any
I'm
horrible
kind of,
advice.
and I think that's just kind of how I walk through life. I'm kind of very matter of
Mhm,
fact
mhm,
about things. You know, I guess not necessarily advice, but comments about as he got older from not
mhm,
my side of family, but on my in-law side of the family. Be like, if they would realize that he was still nursing, it's like, what do you mean he's
mhm,
still nursing? I'm like, he's
mm,
still nursing.
mhm.
That's a complete sentence, and that's
Right.
the end of this conversation.
Right,
So,
right. Yeah.
um, yeah. So not necessarily advice, thankfully.
Mhm.
But again,
But just push back. Yeah.
yeah, just like, what do you
Mhm,
mean he's still nursing? I'm like,
mhm.
that's it. He's nursing.
Yeah. Right, right. And
Hmm.
now we will change the subject.
Yeah,
Right.
because yeah,
Yeah, that's great. And then, best advice that you were given?
I think the neonatologists, like, go home and be a family and
Mm,
just kind of trusting my judgment and trusting myself and being and part of that was allowing myself to be vulnerable enough to ask for help and recognize my limits and
mhm,
not see it or treat it as some sort of shortcoming, but just like, we all need help with some things sometimes, and this might be it for me. And so I think that just really helped me a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Yeah, go home and be a family.
Yeah.
That's what every provider should tell a brand new family.
Yeah.
You've got this, you can do it, and we're here if you need us.
And if you, right,
Yeah.
if you encounter anything, we're
Mhm.
here.
Mhm.
Um, or rather, when you encounter something, we are
Right.
here.
Right.
And
Yeah.
just kind of, again, normalizing it, I think for us
Mhm.
made the biggest impact.
Mhm.
I'm sure they are out
Mhm.
there. And,
Mhm.
for me, just having as local as possible, as supportive and non-judgmental as possible, like for me, that would be kind of the guiding principles. And
Mhm.
if even if it's under the guise of support, but there are a lot of shoulds in the
Mhm.
instructions, I would say
Mhm.
just take a moment, take a pause, and step away, because I think when we fall short from these external expectations with all these like should do this, should do that, then I think again we just feel that we have lots of shortcomings, and I think then that hinders the whole process. So whatever the resource is, whether it's online or family or friends, just as long as they are truly supportive in a positive way, um, that would be my guiding principle.
Finally, are there any resources that you would recommend that you think might help people as they navigate, and maybe even resources not quite related to breastfeeding, but I know you went through a lot in the early days with with your baby, with the lung mass and NICU and all of that. So maybe there are resources of that you recommend to families when you hear that they're in similar situations.
Um, I think it's been so long. Our son is now 14. So I think I'm out of touch with current resources that are available out there. But I would just say, in terms of how to pick resources, perhaps, um,
Mm-hmm.
being mindful if groups or individuals are saying that you should do something or should do it this way or definitely should not do it this way. Because I think when we don't meet those expectations, we just kind of can get hindered by those perceptions of shortcomings and feel we're not quite measuring up to
Mm-hmm.
some other person's measure. And
Mm-hmm.
so I would just say surround yourself, whether virtually or in person, with folks who really are supportive of you and your family with respect to whatever, whether it's feeding or nutrition beyond breastfeeding or just anything really, educational approaches or just whatever guiding principles you may have in raising your kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
So,
so helpful. Yeah, just taking that moment to say, wait a minute, am I feeling good from this support or am I feeling worse from this
right,
support?
right.
Right. Yeah.
And, and recognizing like, we allowing yourself enough vulnerability to learn and be like, oh, wait, I thought it was like this, but actually I am learning that this might be a better way or a different way to consider it. But if you feel like you're being triggered or red flags are going up, to trust yourself and recognize like, okay, I need to maybe give myself some space. And just
Mm-hmm.
because someone is perhaps an elder in the family or an experienced parent, we're all are on our own paths, and so we just really need to learn to believe in ourselves and our judgment.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I totally appreciate you taking the time to come on and record your unique story. Every story is unique, but to hear your story of dealing with an early emergent C-section and then a surgery 8 months later, and then breastfeeding a child till well beyond the fifth year. I think this story is going to be really encouraging for so many people who maybe they're not in the exact situation, but they might have some through lines that will help them see that there's still a way to make, um, breastfeeding work for them if that's what they want, or to adjust their goals and expectations and still feel good about them if that's what they want. Um,
Absolutely.
so
Absolutely.
I really appreciate you taking the time to come on.
Sure thing.
Yeah. All right.
All
Have
right.
a great day.
You too. Take care. Bye
All
bye.
right. Bye bye.
Once again, it was such a joy to get to record somebody's story of learning to breastfeed their child. Sara was my first guest who I did not know personally before recording. Her story is one that I feel so many people will feel supported by. If you are one of those people, please take a minute to rate and review this podcast so that other people can find it. If you know someone else who could feel supported by the story, take a moment to share it. It really helps me and the show. Thank you so much for listening to the Milk Making Minutes. I hope you found connection and feel supported wherever you are in your baby feeding journey. The views expressed in each interview are deeply personal and sacred, and I'm so grateful to each person who is generous enough to share their story. It is also true that those views are solely theirs and do not necessarily reflect my opinion or advice as a lactation supporter, and this podcast does not qualify as medical advice. If you are struggling to feed your baby, please seek out the support of a local IBCLC.